Today, somewhere on our planet, a baby was born, and with that baby's cries, the world population hit 8 billion for the very first time. Now, it's impossible to know which baby broke the 8 billion mark, but we can assume with certainty where the birth took place, in the global south. 8 countries in Africa and Asia are where the population is growing most. In fact, India will overtake China next year as the country with the most people. Tonight, 8 billion and counting. The UN says we should celebrate how we got here. Should we celebrate where we're going? I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
Delhi was not like this 5 years ago. The population has increased a lot. Unemployment will go up, and because of that, there'll be more theft, rape and murder.
The growing population in the country is a cause for concern when it has to do with Nigeria as a country.
A population of 8 billion people is too much. There are not enough resources in the world.
As doctors, we are very happy that healthier babies are being born. But yes, in the future, we have to be careful how much can the earth or the nature can sustain.
Also coming up, pro-war propaganda is pervasive in Russia, and it appears many Russians support the war, but not every Russian is following the Kremlin's line, as our reporter has been finding out.
Of course I'm sad, but this is what matters most, the basic distinction between good and evil. If we accept what is happening in silence, I don't know how I could look Ukrainians in the eye.
Well, to our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with the number 8 billion people. November 15th, 2022 will go down in history as the day the population of planet Earth reached and surpassed 8 billion. Now, the history of humanity goes back hundreds of thousands of years, but population growth has only recently exploded. Now, consider this. When I was born in the early 1970s, the global population was approaching 4 billion. Just in my lifetime, that number has doubled. That's how fast things are changing. The UN says that today is a day to celebrate. Reaching 8 billion people has been made possible, of course, by advances in medicine. Think vaccines, think antibiotics, achievements that are life-saving and also life-extending. They made it possible to reach this record number, and when we go back in time, we can see how recent big population growth really is. The number of people living on the planet has increased rapidly over the past century. If we look in the year 1800, the world's population was around 1 billion. It hit 2 billion more than a century later in the year 1927. And by 1960, it had reached 3 billion. Now, that is when population growth really began taking off. By the year 1999, the numbers had doubled, you see right there, to 6 billion. And today, a little more than 2 decades on, there are now 8 billion people on the planet. But the pace of growth, it is slowing. It took 11 years to go from 7 to 8 billion people. It will take 15 years to go from 8 to 9 billion. The UN predicts that peak population will come around the year 2080 with 10.5 billion people on the planet. India, of course, it is at the sharp end of population growth. 1.4 billion people live in the country, which is set, as we heard, to outstrip China next year. Its most populous city is Mumbai, which is growing every year and which is feeling the pressure of that growth.
If you ever plan to take a local train in Mumbai, you should know this. Getting off and on begins while the train is still in motion. There are simply too many people and everyone's in a rush. With over 20 million people, Mumbai is India's most populated city.
I had to stand like a lot of time. Sometimes only I do get seats to sit. I have to fight even sometimes to get in or to get down. So yeah, it's very stressful to travel in train.
Mohammad Khan is one of the many migrant workers who come to Mumbai to make a living. He works in a tannery inside Mumbai's infamous slum, Dharavi. He says Mumbai took him by surprise.
People here run like ants. The way ants move as a crowd, each one walking in its lane, indifferent to others around them. In that crowd, I too had to search for a livelihood.
In the last 30 years, Mumbai's population has grown by 8 million people. That's almost the entire population of New York City. Residents say the city's infrastructure hasn't been able to keep up with the growing population. Housing, sanitation, and basic facilities can be difficult to find. Pushpa Rathore has faced all of that.
At first, I didn't like Mumbai at all. Life in Mumbai is very tough. If you don't work, you can't eat. At the age of 25, I was waking up at 4 a.m. and collecting water from several places for us to use. In a 10 by 12 square feet area, we were 10 people living by making a small partition. To bathe and wash, we had to share only one bathroom. We faced a lot of problems. There was no tap in the house, no toilet in the house, there was nothing.
Despite the struggle, people continue to live in Mumbai and to migrate there. In India, it is the land of opportunity.
I was 16 or 17 when I came here from my village. My childhood was wonderful in the village. It was a peaceful place, unlike the crowds here. It had wonderful people, happiness, every facility, but no money.
And so for money, the hustle goes on. And whether people like it or not, that's what it takes to live in Mumbai.
Officials in Ukraine are reporting a new wave of missile attacks on at least 10 cities in the country. That includes the capital, Kyiv, Lviv in the west, and the city of Kharkiv. Now, the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, says that the strikes hit residential buildings in the capital city. Air defense systems, we understand, were able to shoot down several missiles. At least 2 people were killed. The attacks also struck energy facilities, causing widespread power outages. Authorities say more than 7 million households across Ukraine are now without power. We want to go now to our correspondent, Nick Connolly. He is on the ground in Ukraine on the Black Sea coast tonight. Nick, there are reports that a Russian projectile, that's what we're hearing now from Poland, crossed over into Poland, which is a NATO country. I mean, the potential explosiveness here is clear. What are you hearing about this?
Well, so far, the Polish government, who really are never normally slow to point the finger at Russia, who are known for their hawkish stance on Russia and who have thrown a lot of money at helping Ukraine and building up their military since this war began, are staying conspicuously quiet. They are not rushing to make any announcements. They've called that meeting in Warsaw of the kind of security chiefs to discuss this, but they're not naming it or kind of explaining what they think happened yet. We've seen images on social media of destruction to vehicles, of what we believe to be shrapnel from the scene, but certainly it is being seen in this region as a Russian attack. We've seen even NATO member countries from the Baltics basically calling it as such and kind of implying that this was an Article 5 kind of reason for other NATO states to support Poland. We've heard from senior Ukrainian government figures who said that Russia will not be, won't be done with Ukraine, that its ambitions are further and that it will go on and attack other European countries. So there really is a kind of sense here of an impending danger of a real escalation to this situation, to this kind of 9 months of war we've had so far. But as you know, as everyone has been saying, it is important to say that so far the results have been confirmed, and we haven't heard the Polish government really, saying what they think has happened. And this comes on the day that Ukraine saw some of the heaviest Russian airstrikes since the war began 9 months ago. Walk us through the situation in the country tonight and even what you experienced today. Well, this is pretty extraordinary. We are told by the Ukrainian government that basically the Russians used almost 100 missiles today, of which they say they were able to shoot down 2/3. But that still leaves a hell of a lot of rockets and about 15, we believe, direct hits, mainly on energy infrastructure across the country. Large swathes of the country are without power tonight. extraordinary images from Kiev of just endless traffic jams because all the traffic lights were out. Other critical infrastructure is paralysed, obviously with electricity. Then also often water is gone, and internet, mobile phone coverage pretty spotty in a lot of the country, often far away from the front lines and far west of Ukraine near the Polish border. Where I was here today in the Mykolaiv region, actually closest to some of the Russian ships launching those missiles, there, strange enough, weren't any direct hits, but we had a Russian cruise missile, we believe to be a Kinjal rocket, flying about 10 metres away from us, very low, about 7-8 metres above the ground. The locals told us they had seen these kind of things time and time again. They believed that it was heading towards Odessa. And just kind of extraordinary, just standing there, and suddenly you have that kind of whirling sound, and you just see this thing, flying low to try and get past the Ukrainian radars. So that is just the reality of life here in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, it shows you also just how close, how quickly you can be right there where the missiles hit the ground. Ukrainian President Zelensky today outlined conditions for a possible peace when he spoke to G20 leaders. Nick, it is ironic on the day that Zelensky is talking about possible peace, Russia launches its worst attack yet.
I mean, it has to be said that Zelensky is talking about peace on Ukraine's terms, which means Russia getting out of Ukraine, maybe not just in the territories that it's taken since the 24th of February, but also getting out of Crimea, getting out of Donbass. But certainly we were all expecting some kind of retribution after that humiliating defeat for Russia in Kherson last week. After we've lots of diplomatic failings, we've seen calls for reparations on the international stage. So Russia really in a bit of a bind now, and certainly the sense that this isn't the end of these kind of escalations, and that Russia's going to try and force Ukraine to the negotiating table at its terms with increasing attacks on civilian infrastructure.
DW's Nick Connolly with the latest tonight from Ukraine. Nick, as always, thank you and stay safe.